Annie had enjoyed her daughter the most, perhaps because she knew there would be no more babies, and she'd waited until Natalie was in her first year of elementary school before returning to work. Those 8 years of stay-at-home child-rearing had been financially challenging, of course, but they'd been content, Annie often reflected now, with their shiny-coated cattle and their whippy working dogs and their 3 healthy children with sun-kissed noses and hearty appetites. Kevin may have been rather too set in his farming ways, but there'd been a comfortable rhythm to their lives, a simplicity born of the turning of the seasons and the sweaty grind of physical labour. Kevin worked every day except the Sabbath, on which they'd all climb into their dual-cabin pickup and drive to Coalinga for church. Always counting their blessings, tithing their income, helping out at Sunday school. Until one unexceptional Saturday morning in an unusually windy August, not long after Kevin's 45th birthday. He'd gone out to fix their tallest windmill at the furthest fence line on their property, a faulty vane he'd been meaning to repair for months, and not come back in for lunch. Ignoring the nervous pit in her stomach, Annie had insisted to herself that he's just gotten busy. She'd wrapped up Kevin's sandwiches and prepared a thermos of hot coffee and sent them off with Ralph, their part-time farmhand. Ralph had returned half an hour later, with a stricken expression on his face, holding the lunch bag in one hand and his Stetson in the other. Annie had watched his head shaking and his lips moving, but heard only one thing: snakebite. She'd crumpled onto the kitchen floor, and the children had crowded around her in wonder, having never before seen their mother cry. When amazement turned to fear, and they began to sob too, Ralph gently helped Annie to her feet and led her to the sofa. He called the police, the pastor, and her sister, in that order. Then he poured her a strong whiskey from Kevin's liquor cabinet and read books to the children, while half of Coalinga wandered through their homestead. At sundown, Ralph left, squeezing her hand and promising to return in the morning, which he did, just after the sun had risen, and every day thereafter. Somehow she'd managed to survive the funeral and those first wretched weeks after Kevin's death. But soon enough, when her bereavement leave ended and the well-meaning visitors carrying comfort food dwindled, Annie began to realize that she was, in all truth, alone. She had the children for company, but she had to be their rock, while also attempting to maintain the ranch. Agriculture was not her area of expertise, and she'd learned precious little by osmosis from Kevin. As the ranch became more run down, and she began taking days off school to do something about it, Annie realized that she needed to choose her teaching career or the ranch. By the grace of God, her dilemma was solved 6 months after Kevin's death, when Ralph arrived for work one Monday morning with an offer for Annie. He'd just completed his bachelor's degree in general agriculture, and having recently proposed to his college sweetheart, was looking for full-time work. He was only 22 years old, and most of those years had been spent working on his father's walnut farm some 18 miles west of Oak Tree. But with the patriarch still reigning, and 2 older brothers jostling for succession, Ralph wanted to make his own mark on the world. Ralph's aspiration aligned perfectly with Annie's need. He'd proposed a share farming arrangement of 20% of net profits in return for full-time management of the property. Annie had agreed to this, then offered an additional incentive, an increase to 30% if he turned a 6-figure profit. Ralph had contemplated her words for only a few seconds before smiling broadly and shaking her hand. Over the next 3 years, Ralph had risen to the challenge, reviewing ranch operations first, identifying areas of overspending, cattle feed, and underspending, infrastructure. He'd been scrupulous about day-to-day budgets, appraising all of Kevin's suppliers, and in most cases replacing them with a more economical alternative. Finally, he'd spearheaded a joint venture with the University of California, Davis, enabling Oak Tree to participate in genetic trials for Angus cattle and establishing a graduate internship program. Kevin would never have countenanced such innovation, exposing his farm to highbrow academics and the scrutiny of strangers.